have a show called Kill the Bottle Podcast. I've been very blessed where if I've ever worked with you in anything, I'm going to nag the fuck out of you until you come on my show. Hence, Martina McBride, Richard Blais, Sergey Fraser. Like, I like showing sides of people that you're not used to seeing. Because I was an actor for X amount of years, and now I do something that's a side of me that you weren't accustomed to seeing. That doesn't mean both can't exist. That doesn't mean you can't be a chef and also be an enthusiast to vintage Cadillacs and your vintage Chevy. So I love talking with people like you, talking with people who are musicians, actors, winemakers, distillers. Like I love showing different facets of people's life, because if you wanted to find out about XYZ person, you can watch them on Jimmy Kimmel, you can watch them on Jimmy Fallon. When you talk to me on my show, we'll touch on that. Of course, that's who you are, but I like letting people know that, fuck bro, you binge watch on some dumb fucking TV show, whatever that is.
Stargate.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah. So anyway, that's Kill the Bottle Podcast.
Talk a little, just because it's a subject that we have at various times gotten into at like a similar depth. I'm curious.
I'm an open book, bro.
Well, I'm curious about, in particular, the episode where you talked a lot of Cuba with Laz Alonso and what the response was, because I think, unlike us, a lot of our audience was already like at least somewhat attuned to the Cuba thing, whereas in your case, I'm imagining that a lower percentage of the audience maybe had ever been exposed to that kind of thing. I wonder what you were hearing from people that listen to the podcast.
So for those of you who don't know, there's a television show very, very successful on Amazon Prime. It's called The Boys. One of the actors on that show is Afro-Cuban, and his name is Laz Alonso. And Laz, before that, he was, his big movie was Avatar. That was the thing that he was on. And I got connected to Laz through a mutual friend who's a Cuban TV host in the food space. And anyway, she connected me with Laz. And he and I just, he and I hit it off, bro. He's a fucking good dude. And we talked about, I asked him what his dream role was, and he said Maceo. And he wanted to fucking be the dude with the two machetes on the horse. And it was really beautiful conversation. Because, who the fuck in Hollywood is going to understand that, right? If they're not wearing a Che Guevara t-shirt, who the fuck is going to understand that? But it was a great conversation. But when we talked about Cuba, it's really interesting, Nick. It's because I live where I live, there's a stigma, I think, where if you live here, people automatically think that there's a certain tunnel vision that you have as far as life, whatever that is.
Sure.
They think you are set. When you live where I live, regardless of what you think, because here, guess what? You can feel this way about one thing and feel that way about something else, and you're a human being. That's one of the beauties of this country, is that you have the freedom to think about whatever you want to think.
Right.
When I had Laz on the show, we talked a lot about Cuba. We talked a lot about, him being Afro-Cuban. We talked a lot about him growing up in D.C., where there weren't a lot of Cubans. Right. He grew up in fucking Adams Morgan, which is now Silver Lake, Wynwood, Hipsterville. Before Wynwood. But you know what I'm saying? You've been to D.C., you get it.
I was just in Adams Morgan like a month ago.
Yeah, you get it. And there's nothing wrong with it, because shit changes. It is what it is.
Right.
But that's where he grew up, and he's like, bro, dude, there were people fucking tocando bongo en la esquina. And he's a cubanazo. But I didn't get flack for it. And that's been a blessing, I think, because I'm not associated 100%, even though I'm Miami 100%, bro. My number's 305. It's never going to change. But I'm not, for some reason, in the scheme of things, 100% associated with the template that is Miami. It's this weird thing. But then people meet me and they're like, oh, I thought you lived in Miami. I'm like, no, bro. I've lived here for fucking over 10 years. So my point is that we didn't receive a ton of flack, which I thought was a blessing because we were able to share the story.
Well, and I didn't assume that you had gotten the flack. I meant more from the standpoint of maybe your audience having heard some of that stuff for the first time, that maybe there was more learning.
Yes.
For your audience.
So thank you. Sorry. So there was a bit of that. And I think that's something that I slowly, like a slow drip IV. I give you a drop of it episode to episode, but it's not about perpetuating it. It's more about like looking at demographics of my audience and saying, hey, I do have a large percentage of people that are here that listen to me, so I'm blessed for that. But at the same time, I have to be present to the people that don't know the story. And I think demographics plays a huge part when you're talking about a podcast, because I love the subject matter, but I also, me as the host of our show, I think it's important, if we want to build, to understand the demographics and then align with it. So, for example, I have a big demographic in Kansas City, Missouri. And rando as fuck.
Salina, Kansas.
So I love, first of all, like, all kidding aside, my favorite city besides Chicago, big city, my favorite city in the Midwest is Kansas City, Missouri. Food-wise, beverage-wise, it's fucking mind-blowing. Seriously. And so we have a decent demographic. I go to see the Foo Fighters play. And a band that opens for them is a punk band called Radkey. It's 3 African-American brothers from KC. I invite them on the show. And it barely talked about music. It was talking about Kansas City and the whiskeys that are made in Kansas City and the community there. So I think there's opportunities in learning who listens to you.
Sure. And
who, if you're a fucking Instagram person, see who looks at your shit. And if it makes sense that you cater a recipe that you make, if you're in the food space or whatever, towards people that, like, bro, encourage people. Like, there's an opportunity without sacrificing your integrity to fulfill or to enrich people's lives.